complicated question, but
well, the official ruler is King Fahd bin Abdelaziz. King Fahd is unfortunately very sick. He had strokes in 1998, and since then his half-brother, Prince Abdallah bin Abdelaziz, has been more or less in charge of the kingdom. But this is a very tricky situation because a lot of decisions have to be made in Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure we will get into this later, but which can really only be taken by the king. But Abdallah is very strong as a ruler right now for the ongoing situation.
Actually, what happens when there's a decision that can only be taken by the king and it's only Prince Abdullah who's able to do that?
Well, actually, no decision get made. That's really the problem. And for instance, on the situation with on the war with Iraq, there is a lot of debates taking place, which really would not take place if the king was fully in charge today. That's an example among many. Another example is on how to manage the royal family today. That has to be, it's a very urgent issue right now in Saudi Arabia, and only the king can make tough decisions on the royal family, and Abdallah would like to make them, but he cannot at this point.
Is King Fahd completely incapacitated in terms of...
I think most people would say that yes, he is. I heard some friends of mine who saw him in Spain this summer that he was really not as incapacitated as people say, but in fact most of the decisions are really made by the Crown Prince, even though he does show up from time to time. I mean, he opened the parliament, if you like, or the so-called parliament last May, and he just showed up. He didn't say anything.
Explain to us a little bit about the Saudi royal family. This is very much a family government, is it not?
Well, Saudi Arabia is called Saudi Arabia because it is controlled by the Al Saud family. And it was created in the early 1900s by Abdelaziz. But in fact, it goes back much longer than that. The actual rule of the Al Sauds in Saudi Arabia started in 1754. And except for a very short period of 35 years where they lost power to the Ottomans, actually, the Al Sauds have been in power since 1754 in one form or another in the center of Saudi Arabia. So it's really a family from a town called Durraya, which is very close to Riyadh, the capital today, from the center of Saudi Arabia. It's a tribal government originally. The Al Sauds have a lot of Bedouin roots, and they trace their lineage all the way to Abraham.
I guess we should show, if we could, people exactly what we're talking about here. Here's the Arabian Peninsula, which is comprised mostly of Saudi Arabia. There's, of course, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. Most of the peninsula is Saudi Arabia. And here's Riyadh. What sort of country is that, by the way, right there around Riyadh?
Well, it's pretty stark. I mean, the whole center of Saudi Arabia is really it's like a stone desert, if you like. It's very flattish with a big escarpment, a little bit like in Arizona. It looks very much like Arizona, but drier. Where it's interesting is places like Riyadh and a few other small towns around are actually oases originally. And if you drive on that very stark plain of Saudi Arabia, all of a sudden you will get into a sort of a big escarpment. And there, as far as the eye can see, it will be very, very green with palm groves following a small, what they call a wadi, which is a dry bed river. And the contrast is actually rather beautiful. And so Riyadh in Arabic means garden, because that's where people used to grow dates and alfalfa and wheat and so on in that little oasis.
And what did the Saud family do that enabled them to rise to power and control?
Well, they were sort of a leading tribal family in the 1700s, and in 1750 they made an arrangement with a very famous reformer of Islam called Abdel Wahhab, and we've heard a great deal about Abdel Wahhab lately under the name Wahhabi. So this alliance of the sword and the religion sort of created this family that's this power. And since 1750, actually 54, the Al Saud and the Al Sheikh, the descendants of Abdel Wahab, have worked together. And the Sauds are the political power, and the Al Sheikh are the religious power.
We want to invite our callers to call in, our viewers and our listeners to call in. We have 3 lines. We're going to divide them up geographically for this next hour or so that we're going to be speaking with Jean-Francois Seznec. If you live in the Eastern or Central time zone, please call in at 202-585-3880. Mountain and Pacific time zone, 202-585-3881. If you're watching C-SPAN in the Persian Gulf, which is we occasionally get calls from there, or anywhere outside the borders of the United States, we have an international line that's 202-585-3882. Let's talk a little bit about Wahhabi and how that came. That is something that is more and more in discussions of Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, because it's really one of the major reform movements in Islam today. And it started, as I said, in the 1700s, but it's been gaining a fair amount of momentum, especially since the early 1940, 1950. To sort of make it more understandable about what this is about, I think if you compare Abdel Wahab to John Calvin, you find a lot of similarities. The writings of Abdel Wahab and the writings of John Calvin are very similar. I'm not a specialist in religion, but it's always struck me that the key factor behind John Calvin, as far as I understand it, is the fact that there cannot be any links between man and God. There cannot be a hierarchy between man and God. Therefore, the priests are really not that important. It's exactly the same for the Wahhabis. And it has given birth, under Calvin, to the Puritans and to very, very tight moral views of the world. And it's the same thing under Abdel Wahab. So if we compare today the Wahhabi movement to the Puritan movements of Massachusetts in the 1700s, you find a lot in common. So, and a lot of these groups are absolutely sure of the truth. They have the truth. No one else has the truth. And therefore, they are, they do not tolerate anything else than their own statement. And it's very close to, again, the Puritans of the 1700s. However, what I see as hope in the future is that the Puritans have evolved, and I don't see why the Wahhabis would not evolve. The problem is right now we do have a clash of 2 views of the world between the Wahhabis, who have the absolute truth and their own approach to God. Within Islam, they have a lot of enemies, and they attack all the other Muslims, much more so than they would attack Christians, because they view that the other Muslims have strayed from the true path, and therefore you must change that first.
Is Wahhabi Islam the only kind of Islam or the dominant kind that's practiced in Saudi Arabia? And how is it different from that practiced in, for instance, give us some examples of other countries where it's utterly different?
Well, yes. I mean, for instance, the biggest difference of all is the difference between Iran, which is a Shia country, and Saudi Arabia, which is Wahhabi. But within the range of the Sunni Muslim, and the Wahhabis are a branch of the Sunni Muslims, there are many, many ranges. For instance, Turkey, Egypt, and all North Africa have very, very strong links to what's called the Sufi Islam, where you have saints and you have priests who have a certain way of approaching Islam, which the Wahhabis do not believe in at all. I mean, when I lived in Saudi Arabia and I traveled there for years and years, I never realized that, there was such a thing as Sufis, really, because I always thought there was only the Wahhabi way. You never hear about the Sufis in Saudi Arabia, for instance. But Sufis are very important in the rest of Islam. But the Wahhabis are wiping out the Sufis right now. The movement which is taking hold today, which is also called, another word for it is the Salafi movement, which is not just Abdel Wahab, but all the reform movements who want to go back to the old words of Muhammad, the real words of Muhammad, as they say. They are called the Salafis, the followers of the Prophet.
Just one more question about Wahhabi
Sure.
Islam, and that is, what does it have to say politically about the United States? Is there a political component to it?
Oh, absolutely. they really do not like the United States because they view the United States as being morally bankrupt. I think that's the first key. And the second thing is they see the United States as being the allies of Israel, whom they feel are trying to, fight all the Muslims and suppress all the Muslims in the world. And therefore they're being sort of their front guard, if you like, the attack guard of Islam against this kind of their perception of the West.
And yet the governments of Saudi Arabia and the United States are traditional allies.
Very close indeed. There's a tension for the state on this issue because the state of Saudi Arabia very much needs the United States in order to develop to help develop the country, to defend against potential enemies, or at least that's the perception. On the other hand, they're also very much indebted to the religious, to their own religious right, if you like, and so they have to navigate those shoals constantly, and they've been doing this since the very early part of the modern days of Saudi Arabia.
Okay, much to talk about, but let's go to our phone calls. Our first call for Jean-Francois Seznec from Wichita Falls, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning. I wanted to ask you, guess what the relevance of the name Levant is to that region, and also if he knows any historical information, where was the city of Byblos, where they got the Bible name from? Mm-hmm. Where was it located in that area?
Well, I'd be happy to answer this. It's an interesting point. The Levant is normally academics, and academics tend to sort of define things to suit themselves, but academics will define the Levant as basically being Lebanon and Syria today, and Palestine in the older days with Israel today. So it would be more anything that's really close to the Mediterranean. So the Levant would not include Saudi Arabia. It would probably not even include Jordan, even though pieces of Jordan are so close to Lebanon and Palestine and Syria that it's hard to define otherwise. But the Levant would not include Saudi Arabia. Byblos, the city of Byblos, is to this day, still a small city, fairly lively city in Lebanon. And it's in the southern part of Lebanon. In fact, today, mostly under Shia control in South Lebanon. And that's where the word Bible comes from. But Byblos in Greek means book, so that's really where the word comes from.
How close to the border with Israel?
No, it's very close. It's I would say it's about 30 miles, off the top of my head.
All right, let's go to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Good morning. Oh, no more Minneapolis. Let's go to Dale City, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning. My question relates to not so much specifically the Wahhabis or the Sud, but in general, different sects and trends in the Islamic traditions, the way West looks at it and sees them as danger to itself. A couple of minutes ago, you likened Abdul Wahhab to Calvin. Now, how much is Calvinism dissected by the Muslims as to ramifications for the Muslim world, certain Christian trends, say Scientology or something else? Mm-hmm. Why do we look at that world as if different religious trends, as if some threat to the West? If you look at the history of Islam all the way to the Crusades, after the first wave of Crusades, when millions, hundreds of thousands were slaughtered and the blood was the knee-high of the horses, after that Saladin Ayyubi took the Holy Land back, and he did not kill one Christian civilian. And that follows all the way to the Kosovo, the genocides in Bosnia, etc. Why is it that our different Islam, I am saying our because I happen to be a Turkish Muslim, these Islamic trends are as if some outer space aliens coming and taking over our civilization. Why, if some is more fundamentalist than some others? You have the Quakers and Mennonites and etc. The Muslim world don't look at them as these people, if they gain the preeminence and it's going to be danger to us, they just see it as conservative Christians. Why can't you look at the Muslim world that way? Because the Jews and Christians lived under Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years with full freedom. I happen to be from Turkey. I know that. The Jews flourished very well in Turkey.
Okay, caller, let's get a response.
Well, I mean, it is a very, very important point, and it's really no easy way to deal with this. I think, as I mentioned, yes, I personally view a lot of links between Calvin, or similarities, I should say, between Calvin and Abdel Wahab. However, we're also talking about 300 years of difference, and therefore we have a society, the Christian, Judeo-Christian society has evolved for the past 300 years, and in a way the Saudi society was sort of stayed behind in a way for 300 years. I don't want to say that they're behind in that sense, but they did not evolve in the same path, and in a way we have a 300-year gap between the Wahhabi evolution, if you like, and the Calvinist evolution. I think we don't want to overdo how much freedom there was for the Christians and the Muslims under Islamic rules, even under the Ottoman Empire. Definitely there was a lot of support by the Turkish Ottomans in particular for the Jews, and many of the Jews left. When they left Christian Spain, they were adopted by the Turks. So there is some good feelings there, but it was not easy to be a minority under Islamic rule, and there was always, of course, the tax on the non-Muslims and so on. Furthermore, in Saudi Arabia, under Wahhabi control, there was absolutely no tolerance whatsoever for any non-Muslims. In fact, there was no tolerance for anyone else than the Wahhabis. So it is not a simple solution, the situation here.
Before we go down a lot of different paths, and I think we will in the next 45 minutes or so, but let's get back and just talk about the leaders. If we could just do a capsule description of each of them. You said Abdulaziz is the first, is the one who created the modern Saudi Arabia back in 1930?
Well, he started it officially became a kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I think, in 1932. In fact, he had been in power in Riyadh since 1905. And Abdulaziz named himself king of Hijaz and Najd in 1927, and then Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, king of Saudi Arabia in 1932.
What sort of a guy was he?
Well, according to historians and people who've met him, he was extremely charismatic. Man, first of all, he was very tall, very powerful, and very charming at the same time.
We have a photograph of him here. He looks like right out of Central Casting. Right?
It does. It's
a leader.
But a very handsome man, people say, and he was able to sort of, by the sheer force of personality, was able to bring people to his cause. But he was an extremely, extremely astute politician.
Now, he died in 1953.
That's correct.
And he was succeeded by his son.
By one of his sons.
One of his sons, sorry. How many did he have?
There are a lot of talks about that, but I think the consensus is 37.
37.
And probably as many, if not more, daughters. We don't know for sure.
Now, how does one become the one who succeeds him? How did that happen?
Well, this is very interesting. And in Saudi Arabia, there's really no rule on succession per se. It goes according to Bedouin tradition, which means that the leaders of the tribe, if you like, get together and basically elect a leader. So in a sense, at the level of the leadership, there is a kind of democracy.
It sounds like how the Pope is chosen.
Well, yes, that's a very good. I hadn't thought of that, but it's a very good example. The main princes and the family today counts probably 10,000 princes and princesses, something like this. The family gets together basically and acclaim whom they see as the most successful person in the family and the most likely to succeed as a king. And it's not a primogeniture in the British sense or the French sense before the Revolution, or even in some other places like Jordan or Bahrain, where primogeniture was brought in by the imperial power. This goes back to the Bedouin roots. Now, Abdelaziz, with so much charisma, was sort of able to bring his own line into power. So his sons were then guaranteed that they would then have the power forever. But if you have 37 sons, then you have to decide which one is the best. Now, he decided his oldest son at the time, Saud, would be the best. But Saud was a miserable failure as a king. He spent all the money, and he didn't know how to deal with the tribes. He didn't know how to deal with anyone, and eventually was kicked out by Faisal, his brother, who didn't kill him, but just exiled him. And Faisal, it took him 11 years to do that.
And that was in 1962.
That's right.
I think. Okay. Why don't we stop? I've got to be fair to the callers who are all hanging on the line on their own dime, and let me take a couple more calls, and then we'll pick it up in 1962 with King
Yes,
Faisal.
sir. Yes, sir.
And let's go to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Good morning.
Morning, how you doing?
Good, thanks.
You know, I've been really trying to understand all these different religions and beliefs and governments and stuff around the world as to what's been going on the last 2 or 3 years. And I am a Christian. I read my Bible. I don't belong to any religion or nothing, but I believe in God and Christ. And it seems to me, by studying all these different religions, that all of them have a mix of Judaism and paganism. And we all have some good religions, but the problem is all of us, everybody in the world, Saudis, Americans, well, the hypocrisy is what's causing all the problems here in this world. You know, we have our beliefs. We believe in God. Let's obey Him. Let's obey our beliefs, and let's not be hypocritical. It seems to me they're having the same problem with their leaders as we're having with our leaders, the hypocrisy.
All right, thanks, caller.
I've thought the same thing many times. I think that's a very good point. Unfortunately, it seems to me that it's part and parcel of religion, bringing religion in politics. If you start at bringing religion in politics, you automatically go into hypocrisy. And we probably could write thesis about that. But yes, definitely, all these religions, Islam is, came out of Judaism and Christianity. And there's a lot of points. There are entire books written on the legal system of Islam's coming from the legal system of Christianity and Judaism. In fact, there is probably more in common with Judaism than there is with Christianity in many ways in Islam, especially in the type of Islam which is followed in Saudi Arabia.
All right, let's go to Charlotte, North Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning. I've been listening to your conversation with great interest.
Caller, can you, I'm sorry to interrupt, can you do me a favor and just mute your television so we don't get the echo?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
All right.
Let me turn it. Can you hear now?
That's much better. Thank you.
Much better.
Thank you.
Yes, I've been listening with great interest, and I don't know much about history or religion. I am a Christian person, but I don't believe they're paying quite enough attention to what the Bible really says. Now, for this world to accept Islam, Muslimism, over the Word of God is I just can't fathom it. I can't understand it. God spoke first, and He's the one that designed the whole system of salvation, little Israel's importance, the places where these beautiful people live that surround Israel their relationships down through the centuries of time. But for those people, those nations that live in that part of the world are well familiar with Jehovah and His relationship with Israel down through the centuries of time. There's not a Muslim leader or any leader of any country that He let rule and reign in Israel's whole history that was not aware of His relationship with Israel and what the whole plan of salvation was about.
Okay, caller, let's get a response.
Well, I mean, we're hitting questions of faith, and I certainly cannot take argument with the caller. However, just to give you the Saudi answer to this rather than even my own, the Saudis will say, yes, this is fine and good, and we certainly believe that Jesus was the representative of God, the Son of God in this case. However, we, in our own religion, was brought to us by God, and the angel Gabriel dictated the Quran to Muhammad, and the angel Gabriel dictated it by order of God. That's their belief, and they're just as strongly, they're so fully imbued, if you like, with this belief that it takes over whatever they should feel in terms of the Bible. Now, they view all Muslims, I mean, it's part of Islam, all Muslims believe that Jesus was one of the prophets, and because they believe that God was talking to Jesus. And therefore, they have included in the Quran, there's a lot of parts from the Bible and even from the New Testament, which come straight out of Jesus. From their point of view, they believe that they have the direct word from God, which was given to them in Arabic by Gabriel. So we get to questions of faith, really, more than reality, and it is reality because faith is reality. But in terms of implementing solutions or saying that one religion should respect more than one than the other, of course, all religions should respect each other. But the problem is, since they all have the Word of God, it's very hard to see where the truth lies, and the truth lies somewhere in between, for sure.
All right. Jean-Francois Seznec was educated at Washington College in Maryland. He has a BA in International Affairs. He went to Columbia University to the School of International and Public Affairs. He has a master's degree, two master's degrees, yes, I believe, from Yale, and a PhD from Yale in political science and comparative politics. It looks like you spent your early part of your career as a banker.
Yes, that's right. And then I saw the light.
And you lived in Saudi Arabia for 10 years, off and on, is that right?
I lived in Saudi Arabia for 2 years and in the Gulf. I was in Bahrain for 6 years, in Jordan for a number of years. But every time when I was in Bahrain, I was traveling to Saudi Arabia, covering Saudi Arabia. So I went to Saudi Arabia probably over 100 times.
There's now a causeway. It used to be an island, but now it's linked by a causeway between Bahrain and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, and it's very close. I mean, it's 20 miles between one to the other.
Just 1 minute on what it's like to live in Saudi Arabia, the role of women, the restrictions for a Western person, how much different it is there.
I lived in Saudi Arabia quite a long time ago, and surprisingly enough, it was probably easier at the time to live in Saudi Arabia for foreigners, because foreigners were new, so to speak, in Saudi Arabia in the late 70s, and therefore they were sort of better received. There was less of a fear of Western influence on Saudi Arabia. It was always difficult for women, and I'm sure we will get into this in the program quite at length. The situation for women in Saudi Arabia, whether Western or local, is very difficult. But it's a very exciting place, because when I went there as a banker, we really had the feeling we were going to green the desert. I mean, the place was growing like mad. All of a sudden there was this big bonanza of oil. And you saw the country grow by the day, and the development, the industrial development. Saudi Arabia is a major industrial power today. And it was not the case 25 years ago, and it's a very short period of time. So the place is really booming, in all sense, mentally as well as physically.
Jean-Francois Seznec says he saw the light after being a banker. He's now a founder and managing director of something called the Lafayette Group in Annapolis, Maryland, which is a private investment company that specializes in the acquisition and management of chemical companies.
Yes.
But I also is a professor at two universities, at Columbia in New York and Georgetown here in Washington, D.C. At Georgetown, he teaches at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. And in New York at Columbia, he teaches at the Middle East Institute, which is part of the School of International and Public Affairs. His classes are the political economy of the Arab-Persian Gulf.
That's correct.
So you fly the shuttle a lot, do you? Or do you go on the train?
Actually, I prefer the train. This way I prepare my classes in the train. I don't tell my students that. But
Okay. All right, and we want to get back to the leaders of Saudi Arabia, but let's, we've got a caller here who's been hanging on for a while. Riverside, California, good morning.
Good morning. My question is, the what is the Saudis' opinion of the American Muslim movement from their perspective? It's my and I'm not an expert in this field, but it's my understanding that they tend to look at it more of a hypocritical because as the individuals live in a morally corrupt country voluntarily, and again, I'm not an expert in this field. I just wondered what they felt about the American Muslim movement. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, I'm really not an expert at all on religion to start with, but one cannot talk about Saudi Arabia without somehow within 5 minutes turn to religion, and so automatically one becomes more aware of religion. And I think, I'm not sure I would agree with the caller that the Saudi, if I understood the point, that the Saudis would view the American Muslims with some kind of looking down to them. I think on the other hand, they're rather proud of the American Muslims, because especially today for the American Muslims, life is not easy in this country, because there's even though a lot of people have reached out to the Muslims, the way the government is treating Muslims today in terms of making them automatic suspects on anything that's happening here is very tricky, and they sort of respect that. I think the Saudis very much respect the Muslims in this country. I think they see it as a movement that is growing very rapidly, that is really much closer in many ways than to their own beliefs. In other words, as far as I know, among the American Muslims in this country, you have no Sufis, for instance. And as we said before, the Saudis were opposed to the Sufis. The American Muslim movements today are mostly Sunnis, and mostly very close to the more conservative moral approach which were promoted by Abdel Wahab and his followers, and the Salafis, which we have mentioned before.
I want to just show our viewers something and ask Jean-Francois Seznec. One of the reasons, I guess, that we talk about Saudi Arabia turns to religion is because Saudi Arabia is home to two of the holiest cities in Islam, Medina and Mecca, and I think it's one of the pillars of Islam that every Muslim must, at some point in his or her life, make a pilgrimage. Or is it only in his life? I don't know.
No, in both his and her life.
To go to Mecca,
yes,
I believe,
absolutely.
to the holy city.
If you're wealthy enough and you're healthy enough, you're supposed to do the pilgrimage to Mecca. In fact, today there are over 2 million people a year from the world going to Mecca, and Mecca is not a big town. So all of a sudden, in the month of Hajj, which changes, they go according to the lunar month, so it changes all the time. But during Hajj, you have 2 million people converge on Mecca. And the Saudis are spending literally billions of dollars every year to host the pilgrimage and to pay for all the pilgrims' expenses and whatnot.
When is the month of Hajj?
This year it should be it should be very soon. It should
just had Ramadan in November
it's 2 months
December.
after. It's 60 days after Ramadan.
Okay, all right. And let's take another call from Erie, Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Good morning. A while ago, I saw some disturbing news reported on one of the European newspapers on the Internet. A barbaric scene, 100,000 people in a stadium while 3 gays were beheaded for being gay. I noticed this was not reported at all on the U.S. Newspapers. And at the same time, I noticed in Afghanistan we were showing all kinds of scenes of the Taliban mistreating women. I wondered if you noticed a double standard because of maybe the oil. We conveniently did see these things in Afghanistan, and we do not see how barbaric the Saudis actually are. I'll hang up, and I'll wait for your comments. Thank you for C-SPAN also.
I don't know about this report about the gays being beheaded in Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure that was in Saudi Arabia. I mean, they do behead people every Friday in Saudi Arabia, but it's not done in stadiums. It's always done on the main square in front of the main mosque, either in the 3 main towns. So it may not have been that. To my knowledge, under Sharia law, to be gay does not imply to be beheaded. They have a very, very dim view of homosexuality in Saudi Arabia. They think they still go back to the days where they think it's a terrible sin, and they will arrest them and beat them. To my knowledge, they don't behead them, but unless there's some other crime linked to it. But as from their point of view. So I'm not sure the description given by the caller is actually from Saudi Arabia, and it could very well be, but I certainly don't know about it. What I'm saying here is that the description from it does not actually apply to the way they do things in Saudi, not to say that they're not beheading people. They are beheading people very rapidly and without too many questions asked, but usually being gay is not the cause of that.
What do you get beheaded for?
You get beheaded for killing someone else. Period.
That's it. It's murder, only for murder.
Yeah. I mean, you know, yes. I mean, the answer is yes. It's for murder. Yes.
I thought I'd read too that there were some that when they rounded up either terrorists, suspected terrorists or whatever, who were suspected in the involvement of killing U.S. servicemen.
Yes.
And they were beheaded.
That's
or many
for
of them
murder.
Were. Right.
Yes. That's right.
Okay. All right. Why don't we, before we run out of time, we've got about 22 minutes left here with Jean-Francois Seznec. We stopped in 1962.
Yes.
King Faisal. Is it Faisal or Faisal?
Faisal.
Faisal.
Yes.
And,
Faisal took over.
And just sent his brother into exile.
Sent his brother into exile, and at the same time was able to be king when all the oil bonanza started. So he was able to reform the country and really started the country on its modern path. Faisal is truly the father of modern Saudi Arabia, and he was a man of great faith, and his main belief was that he could develop Saudi Arabia, bring Saudi Arabia into the 20th century, but maintain the Islamic roots. Now, it's very important to realize that Faisal's mother was a direct descendant of Abdel Wahab, and so was his grandmother. So he was very linked to the religious establishment, if you like. And his wife was also, his second wife was the first one, he divorced her, but the second wife was also indirectly related to the founders of the kingdom, both on the Wahhab side and the Saud side. So he was a very well-respected man in terms of ancestry. He was very religious, and he really also believed that the country should be developed. And he introduced television, he introduced the telegraph. I mean, actually the telegraph was introduced by his father, but he introduced television, radio, and all manners of modern technologies in order for people to start growing. So he was a very popular king, a tough king, very, very popular. He was he kept the family in very tightly, so as they would not be too corrupt and whatnot. And he made sure that the commoners, the rest of the country, would benefit from the bonanza of oil. So he was a very powerful king. He was assassinated in 1975.
11 years. He was king for 11 years.
11 years. And he was assassinated by a young nephew who had been educated in California, actually, but who decided that the country was not religious enough, and who decided to avenge his brother, who had been killed in a riot against King Faisal very early in the 60s, a riot which was complaining that they were introducing television. So that riot against television brought the death of this minor prince, really, and his brother decided to avenge the brother and kill the king. I mean, it was a terrible situation for Saudi Arabia at the time.
What happened to the nephew who killed the king?
Oh, he was beheaded.
He was?
Yes.
Okay, and then what happened?
Then immediately one of the brothers of Faisal, a half-brother called Khaled, became king. But he was a compromise candidate because there were two major candidates at the time to become king. It was Fahad and Sultan. Sultan was the Minister of Defense, and Fahad was sort of the general advisor to King Fahad, to King Faisal. They could not get together, so they chose a compromise candidate, Khaled, who was king for a number of years. And eventually, when Khaled died, Fahad took over. But Fahad has always been very, very strong. He was the main advisor to Faisal from day one.
We were just looking at that gentleman on the screen.
Was that Prince Abdullah, right?
That's
there.
Prince Abdullah. Okay, yes. All right. Let me just go back to the assassination in 1975. The nephew murders King Faisal.
Yes.
How popular was the cause that the nephew was espousing? How
Totally unpopular. I mean, I think to this day, I think a lot of the more extreme movements of Islam, which are very strong and have a voice in Saudi Arabia, are not popular at all. But since they are coming from within, from the heart of the kingdom, people listen to them and they have a lot of say. But they are not popular. People are scared of these more extreme movements. I think it's the key.
It sounds almost Shakespearean within the
It
family,
is,
doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we want to come up to the modern era, but let's go back to our phone calls for just a second. We've got Fairbanks, California. Good morning. Caller, are you there? Fairbanks, California?
Hi, good morning. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Thank you for the show. Yeah, I'm a Muslim American, and I really, we Muslims living in America over here, we hear a lot of directed misinformation about Islam and about a lot of things that goes in the Middle East. Usually, the history are not told critically and truthfully. I think your guest is a Frenchman, and he doesn't say anything about colonizing the Arab world and millions of people killed in Algeria. Million Muslims killed in Algeria. Christian, French, British colonizing the Middle East, and I think it is right now. It's this attack that of misinformation that really was before the Crusades. The Crusades said the same things about Muslims. They were not treating Christians good, and I live in Jerusalem, and we treat Christians very well. I was raised in a Christian school. As a Muslim, you have to be a good Christian and a good Jew. And I believe that. And all this miscommunication and really the truth, really have to say the truth of what you say. And I wish that he can touch up on all this miscommunication. He cannot really say that because he is Christian. If you want the truth about Muslims, you have to bring in Muslim Americans to speak about Islam, not a Christian to speak about Islam. I think, and there is a lot of good, eloquent Muslim Americans that can speak about Islam.
And they have appeared on C-SPAN, caller, but and they will again. But is there anything in particular that you would take issue with, or do you have a question for Jean-Francois Seznec?
The question about Saudi Arabia and how the Arab world wants to live, I think it should be left for them. And I don't think they need the protection of the Americans. He said that they need the protection of the Americans. I don't think they need our protection.
Okay, let's get a response.
Well, yes, originally I am French, I do admit, and I do have some very strong opinions about what the French did in Algeria, and I think your caller has some very valid points, and indeed it would be nice to, and I'm sure C-SPAN does that, of bringing Muslim callers. What I said before is that I'm not a specialist on religion, and I don't. But of course, when one talks about Saudi Arabia, one has to talk about religion as well. Definitely, I mentioned earlier in the program that Islam has, is sort of stands on the shoulders, if you like, of Judaism and Christianity, and there was a lot of abuses by the Christians in the region. I do not deny that whatsoever. So I think I feel very that the caller makes a very good point, and I would in fact agree with most of what he said.
Let's go back, because I want to finish this, and we're now down to about 14 minutes of Jean-Francois Seznec, but I think we got up to the death of King Khalid, who was succeeded by King
then Fahad, and Fahad, who is still in power today.
And that was in 1982 that this transition occurred. And
that's right. I think that's right. You have it.
I've got a chronology right
I don't
here,
have it in front of me.
I hope it's right.
Yeah, it sounds right. And Fahad, who was actually the very powerful king, the powerful person behind the Faisal and Khaled in terms of economics and society and so on, became full king and has continued to...
and this is him we're looking at right now?
That's correct, yes. and is really one of the major statesmen, I think, in the region. He has been able to navigate those shoals I was telling you early in the program of trying to satisfy the United States then and the West on the one hand, and in fact take advantage of them, take the good of the West for Saudi Arabia while keeping the more extreme religious movement whence he comes, together and not fighting too much. So he was able to navigate those shoals very, very well. And now, of course, he's incapacitated, and it's very hard for the kingdom to really take major decisions.
He had a stroke when?
1998, we think. At least that's what I heard.
This is not the kind of thing they put out a press release.
No.
But he was in Spain this past year.
Yes,
for medical treatment? Or?
No, many members of the royal family spend a month or 6 weeks in Malaga in Spain.
Why there?
Well, because it's a nice climate. It's it's nicer than the August in Riyadh.
It's because it's when it's particularly hot.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And now Prince Abdullah is the ruler.
Prince Abdullah is the de facto ruler, and everyone expects him to, when and if Fahad dies, everyone expects him to. Yeah, here he is. Everyone expects him to become the king. But it's not automatic. He will only become the king. He will be sort of caretaker when the king dies until he's acclaimed by the family. So there's always this little, we don't know for sure. But Abdullah being so popular in the country and among the other princes, there's very little doubt that he will become king.
What makes him popular?
He's very, and people tell me that he's very straight-spoken. He says, when he feels something, he says it. And he's much closer to the people. He will actually talk more to the people. He represents more the heartland, if you like, of Saudi Arabia. His mother is a Shamar, which is a tribe from Central Arabia, which used to be the former rulers before Abdelaziz. When the Al Sauds were out of power for 35 years, most of the power in Central Arabia was controlled by the Al Rashid family, who are Shamar, of the Shamar tribe, and his mother is a Shamar. So he has a lot of links to other tribes, which make him very popular in the region. But he's also, I think, it's his sheer personality more than his blood, really.
And one final thing before we go back to our phones, and that is his views about the United States, his feelings about the United States.
Well, I think, he realizes that the United States is the world power, and he will not take on the United States, up front. But he does have a fair amount of disagreements with the United States, and his main disagreement is about Israel and Palestine. And in fact, most of the disagreements today between Saudi Arabia and the United States can find their origin right there. But whereas Fahad was much more willing to compromise with the United States on the idea of Israel and Palestine and so on, Abdullah feels very strongly that the Palestinians are getting a raw deal, and that the United States is no longer an arbiter in the dispute, and has taken totally the Israeli side, and therefore he feels that the Palestinians are being victimized, and he will support them.
And I think that our viewers and our listeners may remember that Crown Prince Abdullah was the one who met with President Bush last April at the ranch in Crawford, Texas.
That's correct.
Let's go to Florence, Kentucky. Our next call. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a little bit down the road from where we were earlier, but it provoked something that I wanted to say. And when we were talking about Christianity and the Muslim religion and the Quran and the Bible and everything, it seems, that cultures have their God. They have the God that they believe in, yet the civilizations, they have their own beliefs. And I believe that most of us exist in our lives with what we can believe and rationalize. So therefore, in Christianity, we have so many different types of churches and beliefs, and we have our own commandments within our churches that, somehow reflect the Ten Commandments. And I'm assuming that other religions on the earth, have the same situation. But what I'm wanting to say, and it's not really a question, but I guess it could be a question at the end here, is, we have... oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I've lost my train of thought. I've got too many things going here. But basically... what are we going to do? Is the world affected by our religions and what we believe? And is this why we go to war? And I know that many believe that's why we go to war. But what are we going to do? How are we going to respect each other's religion when we all have to rationalize what we believe? In the first place.
Okay, all right, caller, thanks. You know that I've got some emails here, and let's just hold that caller's thought, because I know you want to respond to that, but there was one email here that I want to say, I tell you what, I'll look through the emails.
Okay.
You go ahead and respond to that.
Well, I mean, I think the question of the issue of religion really is so difficult because if we bring politics into religion, it always goes awry a little bit. I think just to make a point on the respect of religion, and it's sort of anecdotal, if you like, but the Muslims in the Gulf in particular have a great deal of respect for Judaism and Christianity. They criticize it, of course, but they criticize the application. They view themselves as the heirs of Judaism and Christianity. I mean, for instance, just a small factor, but Jesus in Arabic is Isa, and the name Isa is a very common first name in the region. In fact, the former ruler of Bahrain was called Isa. Jesus. And Moses is Musa, and Moses is one of the leading prophets of Islam. So there's a lot in common, and I think indeed if we didn't have the politics to go with it, there would be a lot more in common and a lot more respect.
I think what I'll do is I'll just go through very quickly through 4 of these emails and then just ask you if you want to pick out any strand here to respond to. How can we avoid a holy war? I think this means a holy war. If both Christian and Islam see the other as non-believers, then they should either be converted or eliminated. I'm afraid that we are heading for a holy war with the end result total destruction. From San Antonio, Texas. How much Islamic fundamentalism rises out of response to U.S. policy of supporting dictators and despots in the Middle East? You think U.S. policy actually blocks secularism and democracy? And could you comment on the first Gulf War with George I, former President George Bush, the father of the current President George Bush, and the ambiguity of the Kuwait-Iraq border and the history of that border? Another one, what does our current worldly situation look like in your views, considering that history shows the Pharisees and Gentiles, community leaders, religious leaders, and zealots? We have had our great witch hunt in the 1640s. Then our religious reform of that shaped this nation and led to the Declaration of Independence, to the religious reforms of the early to mid-1800s. And finally, how much do we as Americans hinder rational links with the Arab world because of our limited knowledge of other parts of the world, and especially through often incorrect views of what Jewish or Islamic beliefs are? It seems ethnocentrism shapes our views in the U.S. Yeah. Any of that you want to pick up on?
Well, we could write about 700 pages on these 4 emails here. But there are some very, very interesting points. I think one I think we must remember, and it brings us the first email in a way, is the fact that everybody has the truth, and therefore, since I have the truth, I have to kill you to make sure that you believe the truth, and this is a problem. I mean, there's no doubt, there's no easy solution. I think the greatness of what makes the United States is the fact that it's one of the only states in the world that has started on the basis of religious tolerance. And this is not the case in Saudi Arabia. They even have problems with the tolerance within their own religion, within Islam, which we had actually in the States. We had problems of tolerance between the sects, and the political systems that evolved became much more of a democracy. So there is no easy solution here, and time creates these solutions, and it may take a couple hundred years, but this developed in this country into a democracy. And one of the emails mentioned, shouldn't we promote democracy in this region because we have until now supported dictators? Yes, we have. But let me tell you, today, if we actually had a democracy in Saudi Arabia, and for that matter, in most of the other areas of the Gulf, this would be democratic state that would elect government extremely opposed to the United States, because the vast majority of the population is extremely opposed to the U.S. policies in Israel and Palestine, and they feel very, very strongly that the United States has turned against all Muslims. Rightly or wrongly, that's the way they feel. And the governments you would get in power would be very fundamentalist groups, even though they would believe in democracy.
This gives me an excuse to bring up something you've written, and we can't read all of it, but let me just read the first sentence. We're almost out of time here. At first blush, an article on democracy in Saudi Arabia, a state often described as an absolute monarchy, could be very short indeed. And then you go on at some length to say otherwise.
Yes. Well, it's true. I mean, it is not a democracy, as I explained earlier in the program. There's one of the classes, if you like, the ruling class, really has the ability to be a democracy. They can elect their leader. But beyond that class, it's totally a dictatorship. However, it is changing. And the pressure the United States is putting on Saudi Arabia, that the world is putting on Saudi Arabia to open up to modern thoughts and concepts, is really making the whole region boil in terms of ideas. Everywhere in the kingdom, people talk. Now, 25 years ago, that was not the case. Nobody talked. But today, everybody talks about everything, about the political situation, and the royal family has been forced, and a few leaders, the main leaders of the royal family, have been forced to sort of let go a little bit. And as I said in these articles, there are some stirrings of democracy. In other words, they now have a parliament. Now, it's not an elected parliament. God forbid we wouldn't want to elect people. But at least it's named, and it's people from all manners of walks of life, and they discuss things, and their discussions are on C-SPAN or the equivalent.
Is there a C-SPAN in Saudi Arabia?
Well, the television is mostly C-SPAN. But people, there are talks of maybe having elections from municipalities in the near future. The status of women, which we have not discussed very much, is discussed all the time, every day in all the meetings of all the people. Everything is boiling right now. And little by little, there's some freedom is taking place, but it's going to take much longer. We're just at the very, very first baby steps of this.
I've got two things to do and only 90 seconds to do them in. Prince Bandar, who's very familiar to those of us in Washington because he's the ambassador. Who is he? Just very briefly. We've got a picture of him here on the screen.
That's right. Well, Prince Bandar is a son of Prince Sultan, the Minister of Defense. He's a very powerful man in Washington. He's not that powerful, as far as I know, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He's not viewed as you look more at Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz, his uncle, or the sons of Prince Salman and Prince King Faisal.
Let's see if we can squeeze in one last call. Gresham, Oregon. I'm afraid we're almost out of time. Can you make it short?
Okay, yes. It's more of a comment, not a question. And I would like your listeners to please reflect very carefully. First of all, thank you, C-SPAN, and thank you, Mr. Seznec, for a very informative program. For thousands of years, humanity has worshipped a creator. They call that worship spirituality. Evil has taken that spirituality and corrupted it, organized it, and called it religion. Please reflect carefully.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that'll have to be the last word. Jean-Francois Seznec, thank you very much for coming in this morning. This was a terrific hour. Tomorrow morning on C-SPAN, Dr. Michael Rapp of the American College of Emergency Physicians and a representative of the Association of the Trial Lawyers of America is Ken Suggs, I believe, if I've got that right, and they will be talking about medical malpractice lawsuits. Also, Jack Nelson, former Washington bureau chief of the Los Angeles Times, now a fellow at the Joan Shorenstein Center on Press Politics and Public Policy at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, will talk about his recently published report on secrecy in the U.S. government. That tomorrow on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. On Sunday, in the meantime, thanks very much for watching and have a great weekend.
On tomorrow's Washington Journal, a segment on medical malpractice lawsuits and their impact on medicine, insurance rates, hospitals, and patient care. Also, a feature with Jack Nelson of the John F. Kennedy School of Government and his report on secrecy in the Bush administration. Washington Journal begins tomorrow morning at 7 Eastern, 4 a.m. Pacific.